Kia ora and welcome. My name's Tony Gary and I'm the MBA Director here at Otago Business School. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our second series of webinars to celebrate 10 years of the online Otago MBA. Tonight, or in Grant's case this morning, because Grant Corcoran is our guest speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Grant, who is currently in Switzerland, but a little bit of background to Grant. Grant is a BCom finance alumni from Otago University. I won't say what year, Grant. I'll leave that to you. Whose experiences include leading a startup through to scale up, and I believe that was a Series C startup. International finance and risk management with organisations as reputable as Citibank, Credit Suisse, and the Royal Bank of Scotland. Involvement in agriculture, including 12 years managing his own farming business, and management and governance positions in a number of SMEs and startup industries. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Grant Corcoran. Now, we have had some technical difficulties with Grant's setup, so we're unable to actually see Grant, but we can hear him loud and clear, and we can see your slides, Grant. So thank you, and it's over to you now. Sorry, one more thing from me. If anybody's got any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we can ask them at the end. I think Grant's going to talk for around 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions. Thank you, Grant. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tony, for the introduction. Yeah, apologies to be talking about a tech startup and not being able to use technology to get a video working. But anyway, I think it's in everyone's benefit that you don't get to see me early in the morning over in Switzerland. So just want to take a brief opportunity to give an overview of Oratane. I think it's quite an interesting story out of Dunedin. I'll start with a little bit about me, just so you understand my perspective and where I come from. Mainly about the Oratane story, which I think is quite a nice example of to me, where the future of New Zealand needs to rely on. The type of business model, and then a few lessons I learned from it, but relatively informal. Happy to answer questions as we go, or if Tony prefers at the end. So anyway, I'll jump in. So my background started when I saw a program with Sir John Key, who wasn't Sir John Key at the time, as a currency trader back in New Zealand. So that was 1986. My aspiration was to be a farmer, so I thought being a currency trader was the best way to do that. So that's me in 1990 in London, trading currencies for the Royal Bank of Canada at that stage. So that was where my career started. And since then, it's been a rather sort of unusual career path. So traded currencies largely in London, but also New York and the Far East. Ended up running Citibank's currency option book, so a derivative on currencies, and traded the euro dollar, so the biggest book. So after doing that about 11 years, I thought I'd had my nose in the trough long enough and bought a couple of farms and came back to New Zealand. Was hands-on farming down South Otago, but also tried to do things a little bit differently. So we actually exported our own venison. We were frustrated with the schedule prices. So we set up an export company, which was interesting. Didn't make any money, but learned a hell of a lot. Stood for the Fonterra board twice and failed. Much different company now. I'm a big fan of what Miles Hurrell's done at Fonterra. I think it's a fantastic company, but stood for the board and failed twice. Become involved with a local plumbing electrical firm, Foley's, where I'm still involved, in a really good SME. Learned a lot about that. Then invested in Oratane 2013, and typical story with a startup, put too much money in, so had to work in the company. 2024 retired from Oratane and are sort of doing a variety of things, but largely now we're Tatra Hills. We're looking to innovate in agriculture, looking at regen ag, combining ecotourism, and looking to do something slightly different to optimise the return on assets there. So large focus on agriculture, but also other SMEs and some investments offshore. So to the more interesting bit, Oratane. So the Oratane story. So these slides I've taken from one of the staff inductions that we used to do, but I think it's quite a nice story. So in November 2008, the Otago Daily Times published a news story about Oratane, and I love the headline. It's Dunedin firms with worldwide ambitions, which is quite a brave and bold aspiration back in 2018 when the company wasn't making money. But as Nelson Mandela says, there's no passion to be found in playing small and settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living. So really proud that from day one, Oratane was hugely ambitious and wasn't afraid to say it. And I think, the expectations that you set really determine the outcome that you get. So absolutely proud of the fact that that the company, could see the vision, could see the potential of the product, and aimed high. So a little bit about the service of Oratane. So the goal was to commercialise forensic science to protect New Zealand brands from food fraud. So a little bit about the science. You'll see a few forensic cases there, but the 1080 case is a New Zealand one. So Professor Russell Frew and Professor Richard Barker, the Pro Vice Chancellor of Sciences, worked with law enforcement in New Zealand to help solve an extortion threat using, somebody was extorting Fonterra and the dairy industry with 1080. So the way they could do that is all products are a product of the environment they're grown in or are in. So the products absorb the natural environment, and what we do is we measure the stable isotopes and the trace elements, and we create a fingerprint of that product, and that fingerprint links it back to the origin. So the case on the right, Operation Compass, is a really good example of that. So what they did is they took hair from a victim's head, and by looking at different parts of the hair and knowing the growth rate of hair, they could tell where that person had been. So it was, in fact, the person was in Wales, before that in north of England in Birmingham, before that in Holland, and before that in Ukraine. And the way that they could tell that is the different isotopes. For example, I'm here in Switzerland right now. If they looked at me, the hydrogen would be different because of the altitude. The sulfur would be different because of the distance from the sea. The strontium would be different because of the soil structure underneath. And that embeds itself in the product. So essentially taking a forensic science product and using it to protect New Zealand brands was the original idea. But what we had to overcome, we were, at the stage we were pre-seed and seed stage, so we had to overcome the commonly called valley of death, when you have a product but you can't fund it without external investors. You're not commercializing it through the clients at the stage, so you need to be able to get funding via investors. So many companies fail at the stage. I think the statistic is 98% of startups fail within 3 years. So many people fail to be able to bridge that hurdle. And I think that's the number one thing for the early companies, is to be able to sell the vision of the product so investors can understand in what sort of time frame that you can commercialize it from customers. So where's Oratane today? So we've got Sir John Key is our chairman, which I think sort of quite a nice circular route for me. my career started with inspiration from Sir John, and now we've got him on the board. Absolutely outstanding director, incredibly well connected, and he says no to most things. So when we asked him to come on the board, I asked him, what are you up to these days? And he said, generally playing golf and saying no to people like you. But when we started to talk a little bit more, I think what really resonated with John was, we're a New Zealand company, we're exporting a service, we're commercialising New Zealand intellectual property. It's a weightless export. We're creating fantastic jobs for New Zealand graduates, and we're dealing with some of the biggest brands in the world. So when I started out saying I believe this is sort of the future of New Zealand, well, I'm a farmer and we are heavily reliant on primary products in New Zealand, and there is a place for that clearly. My view is New Zealand has to innovate and start exporting services a lot more. We need to be providing these high-paying jobs for New Zealand graduates. We need to be monetizing our IP. So I think, to me, that is the future. There's a lot of great innovative companies in the tech space, or clearly, Rocket Lab, clearly Zero, but in the agricultural space, there's companies like Halter doing fantastic things. So for me, that is the vision that New Zealand needs to have, is to be able to create the environment where young companies can grow. On the right, there's a headline in a paper, and there's a good and bad in that, other than my dodgy hairdo, which is clearly bad, but headline there is we hit $500 million valuation, which is a fantastic milestone. But typical New Zealand media has to put a negative spin on it, but faces companies' office scrutiny. Just to explain that, a journalist rang up and said, "What's your revenue?" And I said, "I'm not telling you. I don't need to. We're not telling you." And he goes, "Oh, well, we'll talk to the company's office." So they called the company's office, and the company's office said, "We'll look into it." That was the company's office scrutiny. The next day, the company's office rung back the journalist and says, they're not required by law to disclose their revenue to you. So absolutely frustrating, the New Zealand media and the tall poppy syndrome. If that was elsewhere, if that was Aussie or Silicon Valley or Switzerland, they'd be celebrating the success. But not only do you have to battle a difficult environment to raise money in New Zealand, we've also got to battle the the negative press, and what goes with that. So, look, it's no big deal, but it is a slightly negative headline where there need not be one. Anyway, I'll get over it. So, what we said in 2016. So, this is an actual graph from our from an investment memorandum and IM back in 2016. We're doing zero revenue. And we put three scenarios. We hit above what we said we were going to. At that stage, it was compound annual growth rate of around 90%. I've anonymized the numbers there, but to give it some scale, this is in the public domain. The valuation sort of mirrors the revenue. But what I'm really, really proud of that is, as I said, we've always been hugely aspirational. Even in 2016, we've been going 8 years. Our revenue was sub $500,000, but we had very ambitious aspirations of what the product should be able to deliver. So where are we today? The company we keep, again, public domain, Chanel have invested, some outstanding investors with Longridge and Lansdowne Partners and Highland. Sir John Key on the board. Richie McCaw has done some great work with the leadership team back when I was there to help us build on the culture. And Shanti Aitkins is one of our directors, a superstar, rock star director and investor. Founded a unicorn and billion-dollar company in Silicon Valley. So we've been able to attract some really good people, and really, really proud of the company we keep. The client list that Oratane has, it's in the public domain, most of them, but Fortune 500 companies, large brands, most of the big retailers, most of the big fashion brands, a lot of the large pharmaceutical and food companies are working with Oratane. Also, we work with the US government and other governments. We've clearly done work in New Zealand with law enforcement. So we work around the world. I think the most gratifying thing about working with governments is the due diligence they put you through in order to be able to work with them. So again, this is public domain. But the US government came out and said we had a unique and innovative concept that's not otherwise available. So that really speaks to the product and the barrier to entry we grew. So looking back, there's sort of been some real key turning points in our development. So formed to commercialize the forensic science. Our original hypothesis or thesis was to use forensic science to protect New Zealand exporters from food fraud. There was the horse meat scandal in the UK, there was the melamine scandal, Sanlu, etc. So the original thesis was that. We've slightly moved away from that to be more broadly apply the forensic science underlying product around ESG, around sustainability, deforestation, anti-slave labour, tariff avoidance. So the use case has changed, but the product hasn't. So some key turning points. 2014, we decided we were a data company, which is a real key pivot. So we really struggled to sell the science product. The science is difficult to commercialize, but really struggled to sell science projects, mainly because when we're selling into companies, you tend to go into R&D, into technical, and they didn't have big budgets. So what we decided is if we looked at ourselves as a data company, we would capitalize the data investment and then sell a license fee. So that allowed us to sell more. So that was a key moment. Moved offshore, so 2016. I remember it clearly. We had an argument at the board. Our chair at the time said, "I've never seen a company fail in New Zealand and go offshore and succeed," which I thought was a good one-liner, but it wasn't logical. Very little is inevitable. So I think that sort of, on a serious note, it sort of indicated lazy logic, and it's one thing that we really focused on. I'll talk about it in the culture about disciplined thought. So it wasn't disciplined thought. Anyway, we won the argument and went offshore. We mapped the world for a lot of products, but cotton was one that was lucky. But probably the major turning point was we got the US government contract in 2020. I think it'd be safe to say with COVID hitting, without that, we probably would be a company of 5 people in Dunedin, and you wouldn't have heard of us, and I wouldn't be talking about it now. So there's been a hell of a lot of luck in Oratane's success. I think the one thing that isn't luck is we've never given up. So the tenacity has got us through. But if we hadn't gone offshore, if we hadn't decided we're a data company, if we hadn't gone offshore, if we hadn't mapped the world in a number of products, and if we hadn't got the US government contract, we would have failed. Success often has more in common with failure than mediocrity. It's a line out of a book called The Strategy Paradox, which I recommend. Here, the other analogy is love's got more in common with hate than indifference. So so I think it's really easy to compare success with mediocrity, but it's wrong because success and failure have got way more in common. It's just often exogenous events that have made the difference. Then we've got the Series B, Series C, John coming on board are all key points. But without those 4 key points earlier, we wouldn't be here today. With Oratane, whenever I talk about it, I think the thing I'm most proud about was the culture. Getting back to the point, we always thought we were a big company. So what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means, when we're burning cash at a good rate of knots, we still invested in culture, we invested in strategy, and we invested in governance. They're all hard things to invest in because they're all long-term payback. And we've got down to 1 month runway 3 or 4 times back in the day, which is uncomfortable position, but we've never not invested in culture. What is culture? A lot written about it, but it's the one I like. It's the unwritten rules of how people work together, interact with the outside world. And Richie McCaw was absolutely outstanding with the work he's done with us on this. If you know him personally, he's different to the persona you see. He's incredibly humble, incredibly intelligent, but very, very focused on, on the psychological aspect and building that culture. So really for us, it was the rules, how we work together. Yeah, Drucker has another good one. Disciplined thought, you don't need hierarchy. Disciplined people, you don't need hierarchy. Disciplined thought, you don't need bureaucracy. Disciplined action, you don't need excessive control. So we always tried to live with that. So discipline is something that runs strong through the company. The other thing we try to do is be a meritocracy. Meritocracy sounds brilliant, but it's also quite brutal. It's not equal outcomes; it's equal opportunity, and that can be quite hard. So it's something we've tried to embed, not always perfectly, but very much was the vision to do. Another one that we've looked to adopt is the Netflix model, and you'll see from the presentation there's not a lot of originality. And sort of being a magpie for ideas, love taking knowledge from other areas and applying it. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as an original idea; it's just the obscurity of the source. So we try and learn from as many sources as we can and adopt it. So Netflix model is a great one. So on the right, there's a couple of slides. Generally what happens is, as businesses grow, the complexity increases, and the normal default is to add more controls. When you do that, you lose the entrepreneurs. Netflix model is all about increasing the talent density. Quite brutal, but it's about giving context, not control, focusing on the value, having teams highly aligned but loosely coupled. But they have a thing they call radical candor, so they give very direct feedback. They have what they call the keeper test. If somebody was going to leave to go to a competitor, if you wouldn't fight to keep them, then you should remove them from the business. But their whole aim is to get that talent density, the proportion of high performing people compared to the rest, and it's worked really well for them. So that's something we've tried to embody, have that context, but not highly controlled, unless we need to around the science product. That's highly controlled. But in terms of the entrepreneurial side, is give people the context and give them the freedom. The other thing we needed to do was to be a learning organization. So the project paradox, people make the biggest investment, biggest commitment with the less knowledge. So what we tried to do is make iterative steps where possible and validate with data. And then learn fast, learn as quickly as possible. We sort of look at it almost, from a currency trading background, it's an optionality. We try to embed the business with options. But another analogy is to look at it like playing blackjack. You're counting cards, and as you see the number of face cards coming, as the odds go your favor, you increase your bet size. So we've tried to be a learning organization. But to do that, you really have got to be humble. So another one we take, Warren Buffett, who absolutely love, his comment is, or Charlie Munger, need to know your circle of competence. You can never operate outside your circle of competence. So, as Charlie Munger said, I'd rather somebody with an IQ of 130 who thinks it's 120 than somebody with an IQ of 150 and thinks it's 170. So we were very, very much focused on having that humility, because that's the only way you can learn, is by accepting the fact that you could be wrong. So again, we tried to build that humility and curiosity into our culture. So just a few screenshots of what orangutan means for me. So that's Professor Frew in tea plantations in Sri Lanka, and Stewie Whitehead, Chief Transformation Officer, the large guy in the pink shirt, down in Indonesian palm plantations. Both of these cases are where we were asked to do products that we didn't understand the supply chain. So we invest our own time and money of actually going down and learning how those supply chains work. So the palm one, Stewie and I went to Indonesia for 10 days, stayed with smallholders, learned how to harvest, helped them harvest, actually learned the supply chains. it's really easy to be, in a country like Switzerland or England or New Zealand and judge people around sustainability when what they're trying to do is put food on the table for their family. So, I think it was really, really valuable for us understanding the production supply chain, but also the people. These couple of slides, one in the middle is four of us there in Singapore. The lady on the left, Michaela Masali, her first day on the job was get on a plane, fly to Singapore, you're meeting the World Bank. Her background is from UCL in human rights, we're meeting the World Bank. But I think, that sort of speaks to the opportunities we give people. Absolutely love developing young people there. So, all of those, the other three, myself, but the other three have all developed really nice careers within Oratane. The photo on the right is a cohort of young people who invested in the leadership development program. So again, we've sunk good money into a leadership development program. We take people around the world on 4 modules. Training about supply chains, training about strategy, getting in front of high-level officials. But again, investing in the long term. One of the people have left. Another one was asked to leave. But 2 or 3 of those people will be the leaders in 4 or 5 years' time. Briefly, this one, those pinpoints are a data collection trip that we did. The blurry photo on the right is us in the car park in IKEA in Amsterdam. So what we did there is when we decided we were a data company, we thought the cheapest way to build a map was to get samples of apples. They're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, they're cheap to get. So myself and 5 ice hockey players from the Dunedin Thunder, because we're mad keen ice hockey fans, traveled around Europe collecting apple samples of all things. I think we spent around about $60,000 on a 7-week trip. Incredibly cost-effective way to build up our initial database. But again, sort of spoke to being, innovative. We had 6 of us sleeping in 1-bedroom apartments. We spent no money doing it, but we built this data and it spoke about sort of that, the context, but the loose control. There was no budget. There was no expense forms. It was just, here's what we want to achieve, get out and do it. So a few slides about the business model. So I'll go through it quickly. So on the left is the physical sample collection. In the middle is the IP, our data models, database, specialist supply chain knowledge, our machine learning, etc. And then on the right is the value to the client, the supply chain integrity insights, the data-driven insights. Our heavy investment is in the middle, is in the IP. The stuff that we can outsource, which is not strategic, we will do so. So we're moving the business model to be scalable through automation, and it's become more so after I've left. So there's a world where Oratane doesn't touch a sample. A sample goes direct to a lab. The samples are analysed, the data is ingested, run through the algorithms, and results are done. So it's a really, really scalable model, which leads on to the business model. So hugely scalable. It's got a network effect. Every new client we sign adds value to the system. It's got economies of scale, and the Medici effect is like innovations created at the intersection of disciplines and ideas. So we've combined forensic science with statistics, and now we've combined it with technology. So that's sort of the business model we were aiming for, to be able to build that barrier to entry, which segues into strategy. So really focused on building our competitive advantage. Again, Warren Buffett, my idol in many ways. So looks at in business to look for economic castles protected by unbreachable moats. So why worry about strategy? We could easily have built a business and then have someone leapfrog us. So the harder thing to do was embed that barrier to entry as we were going. Which is what we did. So strategy, again, it's a little bit like culture. There's a lot spoken about it and books written on it, and it's harder to do in practice. But The last one there I really like is corporate culture is the only sustainable competitive advantage that is completely within the control of the entrepreneur. A lot of what we've done can be replicated. We continue trying to put other hooks into the system where it makes it hard for people to replicate. But the one thing they can't replicate is that culture. So again, why that's been sort of central to our strategy. Our strategy is not rocket science. It's bulletproof the science, audit product, own a sector, created Oratain as a service, and diversify. So it's a very simple strategy. It's not overly complicated. It's not fancy. It's just it comes back down to executing a really clear and simple strategy. So yeah, as I've said before, nothing is original. There's no such thing as a new idea. It's impossible. We simply take a lot of old ideas and put them into a sort of mental kaleidoscope. Mark Twain. I love that. So getting back to that learning organisation, taking a lot of feeds from a lot of different places and trying to combine them. So just a few sort of lessons we've learned along the way. Learning and compound growth. I love compound growth. Obviously, again, the Warren Buffett one. But if you grow at 10%, you double every 7 years. That applies to financial returns, but it also applies to learning. So the quicker you can learn, the quicker you can compound that growth. Yeah, there have been times that we've been slow to learn. There have been times we made the same mistake a number of times, but that compounded growth equally applies to intellectual property as it does to return on investment. Culture. It's got to be aligned to the objectives. So the culture on our farming business is much different to Oratain, the culture of trading, or the culture of Foley's. They're different. They've got to be aligned to the objectives of the business. But you absolutely need to get that right. Grit. Yeah, I guess the difference between success and failure is giving up. I've got another one there. Beware of heuristics. One of the heuristics is the sunk cost fallacy. You put too much in, so you don't want to give up. We probably succumbed to that heuristic. Thank God we did. But grit is really, really hard, and that's the reason we invested in governance. And the reason I say that is like, one of the comments before from the strategy paradox is success is more in common with failure. And if you go back and study, say, VHS and beta and video, beta was a better technology, but it failed, and we all look at it as a failure. But it probably isn't a failure. So why I think governance is really important is, as an entrepreneur, you've got to have an undying belief in the vision of the company. You'll just give up otherwise. You wouldn't get out of bed. So you've got to have just an evangelical approach to the belief in the company, but you've got to accept you might be wrong, and that's where you need a board that can go, look, you're missing it. You're not seeing it right. You're falling for sunk cost fallacy, falling for confirmation bias, whatever it might be. So for me, really important as a CEO to have undying belief in the potential of the product. So you overcome the hurdles, be flexible to overcome the hurdles, but you got to have somebody who'll say, look, you're wrong. Execution is the only thing that matters. Strategy is overrated in my view. Governance, other than for telling you when you're wrong, is less important in my view. It's all around execution. Companies evolve quicker than we can. That's I probably should have transitioned a couple of years ago. I think I was really good when this company was 20 people and everyone done everything. When there's 270, it's a different skill set. A big lesson I learned, and a mistake I've made numerous times: beware of management overdraft. That came out of a book called The Hard Things About Hard Things, which again I recommend. But management overdraft is when you know the right thing but you don't do it. So like letting somebody go, cutting costs or whatever. Every time you don't do it, don't make those hard decisions, you go into overdraft, and sooner or later you pay the price. So just, I've been reluctant to make those tough calls at times. We certainly have let people go, but beware of that management overdraft. Funding in New Zealand is difficult. It's getting better with some, the more successes in companies in New Zealand, the greater the pool of venture capital. But it is really hard to fund in New Zealand. We found until we went offshore, till we got offshore investors, it was really hard to find the funding in New Zealand after that early stage, friends and family. Scaling's hard in New Zealand because we don't have such a pool of talented people who've been there and done that. We would often talk about some roles you can get away with an autopilot, a co-pilot. Other roles you need a pilot. So, if you're landing at Queenstown, you probably need a pilot. Whereas if you're landing in Auckland Airport, you can get away with a co-pilot. So by that, I mean some roles you need someone who's been there, done that, and has got the experience. Silicon Valley, there's a myriad of people with 20, 30 years experience, of people who've had 3 or 4 exits. New Zealand, it's quite hard to find that talent, was my opinion. And then private equity, the frog and the scorpion. Sure, you know the frog and scorpion analogy, but the PE are absolutely great. We need them to grow, but they're good at identifying companies and buying and selling. They don't understand what it's like to run a company. It's a lot dirtier, a lot tougher to actually run the company. So last slide. So positive but paranoid. So that's with that undying belief that you can succeed, but paranoid that you're missing something. The competitors are moving up on you. Stockdale paradox. One out of good to great, Jim Collins. Deal with the brutal, honest truth, but have confidence you can overcome it. So again, don't be fooled by confirming data. Like look for the facts, deal with it. So long-term stable, again, that long-term vision, but short-term flexible. Totally committed to, but open to data that says you might be wrong. All of these things are more or less saying the same thing. Never satisfied, but proud of what you have achieved. I think Oratane as a company should be a massive company. It provides a fantastic service that delivers a lot of value to clients, creates fantastic careers for staff. It adds a lot of good for all of the stakeholders. There's a lot of ways the product can evolve. They're ahead of the market. So the new CEO is significantly better than I am. We'll absolutely take that to the next level. So I believe that was the end of my slides. I'll stop sharing now, but I still failed to get the video camera working. So I will hand over to you, Tony, for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Grant. Now there's no questions yet from the Q&A, so I might step in and ask a question, Grant.
Sure.
How did you decide it was the right time to step back, and how difficult was that?
Great question. Great question. So I was pretty thought about for a while. I really wanted to get the Series C capital raise done, and that was a personal milestone. It's never the perfect time, and there is unfinished business. There are things I wish I could have achieved in my time, but really on a personal level, I'd gone hard for 10 years. I think, I commuted month on, month off from Dunedin to London for 2.5 years, largely economy class. Moved the family overseas. I think traveled 200 days a year. So sort of at a personal level, I thought, my energy was in danger of dropping, and the skill set to take it to where it needs to go. Being brutally honest, there are things that I didn't have in my toolkit. yeah, sort of a bit of push and pull was like, yeah, better for the company and also better for me. So, yeah, it's tough though.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Just another question for me. We still don't have any questions. But another question for me. You've mentioned the importance of culture.
Yep.
Now, clearly, that's a challenge for many organisations when they're scaling up, trying to maintain that culture, particularly when they go international and there's a key person that often the culture is focused around. How did you go about ensuring that you achieve that?
Um, Yeah, really, really, really tough. I think that's the biggest challenge of scaling up and going offshore. So I think two things, like as you're scaling up and you're employing a lot of people, you can sometimes drop your standards. So you can sometimes ignore behavior you shouldn't because you think, if I let that person go or that person goes after tough feedback, it's different employing 20 people, it's 21, 22. So sometimes I think as you're employing people, you can drop your standards and that can impact culture. And I have made that mistake before. One thing that we've tried to do is really hero the people, no matter what level, who live and breathe the culture. So a good example, so Stewie Whitehead, who's Chief Transformation Officer. He's been in the company 10 years now, I guess. He started out as his first job, but a really good example is we tried to do a deal in Dubai. He was in London. He flew from London during the day, went over there to do business on a Saturday. A Sunday, sorry, did business, flew back that night economy class, landed like 5 o'clock in the morning at Heathrow, got changed in the toilets, jumped on a train, went straight to the next meeting. That dedication, you can't, it's just an example of the culture we wanted. So we reward that. We reward that. The people who live and breathe the culture. So very much rewarding the heroes of the culture, and trying to demonstrate, again, the fish rots from the head. So we put a lot of effort into how the leadership team interact with each other, because you can't expect other people to do things that you're not doing. So again, that's why we got Richie on board, because we're pretty identified as we grew, brought in a lot of new senior people from different cultures. We were probably in danger of losing that.
Okay, thank you, Grant. A couple of questions now. What characteristics and skills do you look for most when recruiting your staff? Hard skills or character?
Character, every time. Character, yeah, every time. Um, Look, I think now, knowledge is so cheap. Like, with AI, like, it's really easy to get knowledge. Um, but it's the character. Every time we look for, and so like we would look for people who've overcome setbacks. Love people who've gone offshore to learn, or people who had some hardship they've overcome to demonstrate that grit. Absolutely love looking for the character. And we've employed like a wide range of people from different backgrounds because of that. So yeah, um, absolutely number one priority.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Um, got one here from Leo Kitane. You mentioned success has more in common with failure. Could you share what you mean by that and how that mindset shapes how you back or advise founders?
Yeah. I've done a really poor job of explaining it. So the concept came out of the strategy paradox. So if you Google strategy paradox, a fantastic book. But essentially, what it's saying is that we can't predict the future. It's very, very difficult to predict. Like, we can't even predict the weather or GDP for the next 6 months. So predictions are really hard to do. Um, to build a company that's successful, you need to commit the most. So you're committing the most with the least information, um, and so the way they do that is building the flexibility. So to be successful, you've got to be massively committed, But if the environment changes, so if COVID comes along or something like that that you cannot predict, then it negatively impacts the business. So you could be negatively impacted by exogenous events, things you can't predict, but it is the right strategy. But in order to be successful, you've got to commit the equal amount. Again, I've butchered that explanation, um, but what we generally compare to is the average. So we go, an average company is just a great company has done that. Um, but if you actually look at, if you look at VHS and Beta had the right product. Why they didn't do well is they didn't get the distribution in Hollywood. So if you actually understand why they didn't succeed, you can learn a lot more. So again, look, I absolutely recommend Strategy Paradox. Um, it's something that we've used to embed in our business. So the second part of that question, how do we use that? We embed optionality in the business. So the business can't move quick enough to match the environment. So when COVID came along, you couldn't develop a COVID vaccine in time. But if you embed optionality in the business, you can move quicker when the environment changes. So yeah, love having that optionality in the business. So a small cost that allows the business to move quicker um, when needed.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Um, got a question from Monique Smith. Thinking back, what is your proudest moment from your time at Oratane?
That's a great one. Um, um, Really interesting. So we worked with a guy, Marco Pierre White, who's a celebrity chef, and um, real character of a guy. Again, very humble and shy guy, different to his TV personality. When we met him, he said, "Yeah, why are you doing this?" And I said, "Look, number one reason is I love to be able to do something nobody else has done. So I think we've done that. So I think I'm proud of that. But number two is I love developing careers. I love seeing young people come through. I was given a break as a 20-year-old currency trader, and that changed my life. So I love seeing young people come in and develop. So like if you look at the Oratane people, a lot of those people who've come in their first job, they've got absolutely fantastic careers. So probably that's probably the most personal satisfaction is seeing those careers develop. Really proud of getting the Series C away, getting the Series C capital raise away. The clients we're dealing with, the likes of Chanel, etc., they're all hugely gratifying, and doing something that nobody else has done. Like that's really really cool, but it's really the people that we worked with.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Um, is an IPO in the pipeline? And if so, will you look at New Zealand and Australian or somewhere with deeper capital markets like the US?
Yeah, great question. So I'm no longer on the board. So like I'm just a shareholder with a view. I think IPO's on the table. I think it'll probably be strategic. Like I think somebody will roll up different technologies. A big PE. I'm guessing will be the final would be an exit, but an IPO would be one solution. I think it wouldn't be in New Zealand and Australia because our capital markets aren't deep enough, and it pains me to say that. I think that's one of the big hurdles we've got is our capital markets in New Zealand. I'm a big proponent of capital gains tax. If any politicians out there, I think we invest way too much in farms, like people like me, and hard assets. We need to be investing in IP and brand, and we need more capital to do that. But yeah, sadly, I think it would be offshore. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Um, question from Lizzie. Apart from the strategy paradox, which books would do you recommend as inspiring or effective reads?
Oh, great. Yeah. So Love Good to Great, Jim Collins, like, the hedgehog concept, Stockdale paradox, etc. He's brilliant. Love that. I love the thinking ones, think twice, thinking fast and slow. I think a lot of us, or, like I often pull myself up for lazy thinking. We always teach people about that. Strategy paradox. The hard thing about hard things is really good if anyone's in a startup. Quite a brutal book. It's about Silicon Valley, so possibly a little bit more brutal than the way we would do it. But those common mistakes, like giving away job titles too soon, I've done that half a dozen times. It's a great sense check. So those are the ones that I love reading. Dysfunctions of a Team is really good, and So they're the ones that I go to. And in fact, generally when people start, we'll buy half a dozen of those books and give them the same ones. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Grant. One from Leo Lee, short one. Doing anything in China?
So there's a lot of so it's a global company with global clients and global supply chains. So it's all around the world. The stage here.
Okay, thank you, Grant. We don't appear to have any more questions, but I do have a comment, not a question. Thanks, Grant, for sharing with us your story about Oratane's journey from a Dunedin startup to a global leader. Really impressive and motivating. Your openness in sharing challenges and successes was truly appreciated. So
Thank you. Yeah,
that's
very
probably
kind.
a really good place to end. If there's no more questions, I'll just check. Oh, let me just check. Could be a late one. No, just a big thank you to you and the MBA team. And maybe I could
Yeah,
echo that, Grant, for giving us such a fascinating and insightful presentation. And it sounds like you've got company, a canine company, as well. So it must be coming up to morning walk
um,
time.
no, it's actually my ringtone for my daughter is a dog barking, so I
Oh,
have to
oh, I
leave my
beg your
phone on
pardon.
silent. So sorry about that.
Good,
Yeah.
good,
Oh
good
look.
job. The screen's blanked.
Yeah. So look, thank you very much for the kind comments. And look, I'm really super proud of what we've done. And but also, there's a hell of a lot of luck and it's a fantastic team. But if I can ever help anyone, like I'm a massive fan of New Zealand business. I spent half my time in New Zealand. Um, at least so look, if anyone's got any questions or would like any help, absolutely love to support any New Zealand business. My email is grant at Totara Hills. We've got a website or whatever, the farm, so easy to track down, or through the MBA program. But yeah, absolutely happy to help anyone and who's keen to develop business, because very very proud of what's happening down in Dunedin. I think we've got a amazing place in a turbulent, volatile, difficult world. I think New Zealand's got so many competitive advantages. It's a great place to do business, great culture and great people, and love to support it.
Thank you, Grant, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you, Tony. Sorry about the video, and talk soon.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.